Hello, collegiate scholars. I hope y'all are doing well today. I'm excited to kick off our first lesson of geometry. We will be discussing the building blocks of geometry. So points, lines, planes, segments, rays, etc. Those are going to be foundational to our understanding of geometry. So make sure you're paying great attention, following along with the Edpuzzle and doing your best. Take some notes. It's going to be very helpful as we continue to build on these concepts in the future. So let's get going. So like I said, we'll be covering the building blocks of geometry. Let's start with the undefined terms of geometry. The undefined terms of geometry are figures which cannot be defined by using other figures. So basically they're the most foundational and basic figures, geometric figures, that there are. They are used to create like triangles, squares, rectangles, whatever. But you cannot get any more basic than these undefined terms. So the first undefined term that we'll discuss is a point. A point names a location and it has no size. It is represented by a dot. So when we look at this diagram, we see point P. The way we would name that is we would simply write the word point P. So a point needs to just be a dot and it needs to be labeled. You see that diagram is labeled with that P and then its name is point P. Let's move on. A line is a straight path that has no thickness and extends forever. So a line is named either by 2 points on that line. So we could say line, we use this as our notation, line X, Y, or if it has this cursive letter, in this case letter L, cursive letter L, we could say this is line L. So we have 2 ways to name this line. Now you may ask, Mr. Pittner, could we also name it line YX? I would say yes, you can. However, we just prefer alphabetical order if we can write it in alphabetical order. It just makes things consistent and just easier to follow if we write in alphabetical order. However, line YX is not a wrong answer by any means. Lastly, we have a plane. A plane is a flat surface that has no thickness and extends forever in every direction. So a plane can either be named by 3 letters. So we could say, as you see over there under the name, plane ABC. Or, since we have that cursive letter, R, we could just say this is plane R. Make an ugly cursive letter R. Okay, so we can name the plane in 2 ways, by naming 3 letters or just saying plane R. Now you may also say, Mr. Pittner, instead of plane ABC, could we say this is plane, I don't know, BAC? To which I would say, yes. Even though it's not in alphabetical order, that is not incorrect. As long as you have 3 points. You're using 3 points to name that plane. So let's try this. Let's just name this point, line, and plane. So this point here is simply point L. There's no other way around it. This line can be named in a couple ways. We could say this is line BQ. So here we're using our line notation. One thing to be sure of is that you put an arrow at both sides of that line. Okay? Or we can say this is line G. Again, if you want to say this is line QP, that also works as well. Okay, so let's look at this plane here. We could first say this is plane ABC using 3 letters. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, we could say BAC, CAB, ACB, CBA, whatever. The order doesn't matter. But again, we prefer alphabetical. Or we could say this is plane, I'm not even going to try doing cursive this time, plane M. So here's a question for you. Which points do you think are collinear? Which points are coplanar? Well, think about it a little bit. Collinear points, if we think about it, we see the word line in the word collinear. So collinear points are on the same line. So collinear points would be D and E, or D and F, or H and E, okay? And if we want to take it just a step further, G and E are actually collinear as well, because even though we don't see them on the same line, we could draw a straight line through them and pretend that that's perfectly straight. So if collinear points are on the same line, then coplanar points are, you guessed it, on the same plane. So D, G, and E, they would be coplanar. D, E, and F are also coplanar. They're on the same plane. So I hope that helps you understand what collinear and coplanar points are. Let's finish this up by discussing segments and rays. A segment or a line segment is the part of a line consisting of 2 points and all points between them. So we could view segments as a part of a line. So let's say I draw a line here, and I'll pick 2 points. I'll say these are about V and W. Okay, so let's say I cut the line right at those points. So then I have this segment of a line with points V and W. So here is the line, here is the line segment. Now, a line extends forever in both directions, but the segment has 2 definitive endpoints. So the endpoints are where it ends. So now that we've covered endpoints, let's skip to a ray. Okay, a ray is a part of a line that starts at an endpoint and extends forever in one direction. So let's say we had our line VW, V and W, and I only cut one part of that line. So we have an endpoint at V, however, it keeps going. So we would call that a ray. So we would end up having ray, I'm just going to draw it down here, ray V W. You also see ray RS right here and ray RS down here. We name it by starting with the endpoint. So this ray would be called ray VW if I were to notate it. This is the name of that ray that we see here. I have V under the end that does not have an arrow because V is the end point. Let me draw that a little bit better. V is the end point. W is on the end that keeps going in that direction forever. So I'm going to write W second. Lastly, opposite rays are 2 rays that go in opposite directions and they meet at a common endpoint. You see ray EF and ray EG. So this ray, even though it's going to the left, we're going to write it as if it's going to the right, and we'll say that's ray EF. Oh, let's see. There we go. Ray EF, and this ray is ray EG. So their common endpoint is what? That's right, point E. To finish this up, I'm going to model drawing and labeling a ray and a segment. So a ray with endpoint G that contains point H. So I'm going to draw this ray first. Again, pretend it's perfectly straight. It's a little hard with this software sometimes. And I have a shaky hand as it is. So we've got the endpoint G and another point H. And let's take this a step further. I'm going to name this. So we'll name this ray GH. Lastly, I have a segment with endpoints N and O. Oh man, that's okay. I'm going to try to make this one straighter. Forget this one. So we've got endpoint N and endpoint O. And I will name this segment NO. I hope that was a helpful overview of the building blocks of geometry. If you have any questions or you're struggling in any way, I recommend that you look back through the video or rewatch different parts of the video, or just look through the slides to help you out and come prepared with questions to our next class. I'll be glad to help. Y'all are doing great. Keep it up, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, collegiate scholars.